The dust from the stagecoach robbery still hung in the Arizona Territory air when Catherine Wells realized her husband's body had gone cold in her arms, his blood staining the porch of their small ranch house outside Tombstone in the summer of 1882. She had screamed until her throat was raw until the neighboring rancher, a weathered cowboy named James Dalton, came riding hard across the scrubland with his rifle drawn. Too late to save Thomas, but just in time to see Catherine's world shatter into 1,000 pieces. The outlaws had vanished into the desert, taking with them the small savings Thomas had foolishly kept in the house, leaving behind only devastation and a young widow of 23 who now faced an impossible future alone. James dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the dry earth with a thud that seemed to echo in the terrible silence that followed Catherine's screams. He was 28, tall and lean from years of hard ranch work, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of storm clouds that now filled with a grief he knew too well. His own wife had died 3 years prior in childbirth, along with their son, and the pain of that loss still carved deep lines around his mouth. He approached Catherine slowly, removing his hat in respect for the dead man sprawled across the wooden planks. "Mrs. Wells," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "Let me help you." Catherine looked up at him with eyes that seemed to have aged a decade in the span of an hour. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, falling in waves around her pale face, and her calico dress was ruined with blood that had already begun to dry in the fierce heat. She did not speak, could not speak, but she allowed James to gently take her husband's body from her arms. Together they carried Thomas inside, and James rode into town to fetch the undertaker and the sheriff, though everyone knew the outlaws would never be caught in the vast wilderness that stretched endlessly in every direction. The funeral took place 2 days later in the small cemetery on the edge of Tombstone, where wooden crosses and stone markers stood testament to how many lives the harsh frontier had claimed. Catherine stood dry-eyed through the brief service, her grief so profound it had moved beyond tears into a numb acceptance that terrified those who knew her. She had no family in the territory, no relatives to write to back east, and the small ranch she and Thomas had built over 3 years of marriage would likely have to be sold because a woman alone could not manage cattle and horses and the constant threat of Apache raids and outlaw gangs. James attended the funeral, standing at a respectful distance, but his eyes never left Catherine's rigid figure. Something in her isolation called to his own loneliness, and in the days that followed he found himself riding over to the Wells Ranch with increasing frequency. At first he brought practical help, mending a fence that had come loose, checking the small herd of cattle, ensuring the well pump worked properly. Catherine accepted his assistance with quiet dignity, offering him coffee and cornbread, speaking little, but watching him with an expression he could not quite read. As summer deepened into the scorching heat of August, James's visits became more regular, and slowly, carefully, a friendship began to develop between the widow and the widower. They would sit on the porch in the evenings when the worst of the heat had passed, talking about small things at first, the weather and the cattle, and then gradually about larger matters. Catherine told him about growing up in St. Louis, how she had met Thomas when he came through selling mining equipment, how they had married quickly and headed west with dreams of building something lasting. James spoke of his childhood in Texas, of learning to rope and ride before he could properly read, of the wife he had loved and lost, and the empty years that had followed. "Sometimes I think the West is too hard for love," Catherine said one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. "It takes everything beautiful and crushes it under the weight of survival." "Love is what makes survival worth the fight," James replied, surprising himself with the admission. He had not spoken of such things in years, had locked his heart away so thoroughly he had forgotten it could still feel. But something about Catherine, about her quiet strength and the sorrow that mirrored his own, made him want to try again. By September, the nature of their relationship had shifted in ways neither quite acknowledged aloud. James now came every day, helping with the harvest of the small vegetable garden, riding out to check the cattle in the far pastures, making repairs to the barn roof before the winter rains arrived. Catherine cooked meals they shared at her kitchen table, and sometimes their hands would brush as she passed him a plate and neither would pull away immediately. The air between them grew charged with possibility, with the tentative hope that perhaps they might find comfort in each other's company, that two broken people might together make something whole. It was Catherine who finally spoke the truth that had been building between them. They were in the barn at sunset, James securing feed for the horses while Catherine gathered eggs from the hens that roosted in the corner. The golden light slanted through the cracks in the wooden walls, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow, and when Catherine turned to look at him, her eyes held a vulnerability that made his breath catch. "James," she said, and her voice trembled slightly, "I need to tell you something before this goes any further." He set down the bucket he had been holding and gave her his full attention, his heart suddenly beating faster with a fear he did not fully understand. "What is it?" Catherine set the egg basket on a hay bale and clasped her hands together so tightly her knuckles went white. The words seemed to struggle their way out of her throat, each one costing her something precious. "Thomas and we tried for 3 years to have a child. We wanted a family desperately. I saw every doctor between here and Tucson, and finally one told me the truth I had been dreading. I cannot bear children, James. My body will not allow it." The confession hung in the dusty air between them, and James saw the shame and pain written across every line of her face. In this time and place, a woman's worth was measured in large part by her ability to produce heirs, to give her husband's sons to work the land and carry on the family name. Catherine's barrenness was considered a curse, a failing, something that made her less than other women in the eyes of frontier society. "Thomas never blamed me," Catherine continued, her voice breaking now, tears finally beginning to stream down her face. "He said he loved me regardless, but I always knew I had failed him. I saw it in his eyes when we passed families in town, when he watched other men teaching their sons to ride. And now, if you have feelings for me, if this friendship has become something more, you deserve to know the truth before you tie yourself to a woman who can give you nothing." She was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking with the force of emotions she had kept bottled for years. "I am barren, James. I cannot give you sons. I cannot give you the legacy every man wants. I am broken, and I understand if you want to leave and never come back." James crossed the space between them in 3 long strides and took her face gently in his calloused hands, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. What she saw there made her breath hitch, made her tears flow even harder because there was no disgust, no disappointment, only a tenderness so profound it seemed to reach into her chest and cradle her wounded heart. "Then give me your heart instead," he said, his voice rough with emotion but steady and sure. "I do not need sons, Catherine. I had a son for one brief moment before he was taken from me, and that pain nearly destroyed me. What I need is someone to stand beside me, someone to share the sunrises and the storms, someone whose soul recognizes mine. I need you, not some imagined children who may never have existed anyway." "But everyone expects," she started to protest, but he shook his head, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "I do not care what everyone expects. I care about what is real, what is here in front of me. A woman of courage and strength, who has survived loss that would have broken most people, who faces each day with quiet dignity even when her heart is shattered. That is worth more than a dozen sons, Catherine. That is worth everything." She searched his face, looking for any hint of doubt or false comfort, but found only sincerity. "You truly mean that?" "I have never meant anything more in my entire life," James said, and then he did what he had been wanting to do for weeks. He leaned down and kissed her gently at first, a question more than a demand, and when she rose on her toes to kiss him back, it felt like a promise being sealed between them, a covenant that had nothing to do with children or legacy and everything to do with two souls finding refuge in each other. They were married in October in the same small church where Thomas had been eulogized. Some of the townspeople whispered that it was too soon, that Catherine should have waited a proper year of mourning, but neither she nor James cared about propriety anymore. Life was too short and too uncertain on the frontier to waste time on meaningless social conventions. Catherine wore a simple dress of dove-gray silk that James had purchased from the best shop in Tombstone, and she carried wildflowers that grew in the desert, their purple and gold petals bright against the muted fabric. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When the preacher asked if James would take Catherine as his wife, to honor and cherish her all the days of his life, James's response rang out clear and strong. "I will. Before God and everyone here, I will." Catherine's voice shook only slightly when she made her own vows, but her eyes never left James's face, and everyone present could see the love that had blossomed between the widow and the cowboy who had saved her in more ways than one. They combined their two properties, choosing to live on James's larger ranch, which had better water access and more grazing land. Catherine brought with her the few possessions she wished to keep from her life with Thomas, but she was not haunted by the past. She had loved her first husband, but she recognized that what she felt for James was different. Deeper, perhaps, because it was built on shared suffering and genuine understanding rather than youthful passion and dreams of adventure. Their first months of marriage were a revelation to both of them. James was a tender and patient lover, taking time to learn what brought Catherine pleasure. Never rushing, always ensuring she felt cherished. Catherine, for her part, discovered that intimacy with James felt safe in a way it never quite had with Thomas. There was no shadow of disappointment hanging over them, no monthly cycle that brought hope followed by crushing failure. They came together simply because they wanted each other, because touch was a language that expressed what words sometimes could not. By January of 1883, they had settled into the rhythms of married life. Catherine proved to be an excellent ranch manager, keeping meticulous records of cattle sales and feed purchases, corresponding with buyers in California and Texas, freeing James to focus on the physical work he excelled at. They hired 2 hands to help with the larger herd they now ran, Mexican brothers named Diego and Rafael, who were honest workers and respected Catherine's authority without question. Winter in the Arizona Territory was mild compared to the northern plains, but the nights grew cold enough that James and Catherine would huddle together under thick quilts, talking quietly in the darkness about their hopes and plans. James wanted to expand the horse breeding operation, believing there was good money to be made in selling trained mounts to the cavalry and to other ranchers. Catherine supported the idea and suggested they travel to Santa Fe in the spring to make contacts with potential buyers. But it was one night in late February when their life took an unexpected turn. They had been visiting the neighboring Hartwell Ranch for dinner, and their hosts had a house guest, a woman named Sarah, who had recently arrived from back east with her 3 children. Sarah's husband had died of pneumonia the previous winter, and she had come west to live with her sister, bringing her offspring with her. The children were lively and loud, ages ranging from 5 to 10, and Catherine had enjoyed playing with them, reading stories, and helping the youngest with his supper, but on the ride home, she had grown quiet, staring out at the star-filled sky with an expression that made James reach over and take her hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked gently. Catherine was silent for a long moment before responding. "Those children. They were so full of joy despite losing their father. Sarah said she does not know how she would manage without them, that they give her reason to keep going." "Children can be a blessing," James agreed carefully, unsure where this conversation was leading. "I was thinking," Catherine said slowly, "about all the orphans in the territories. The children who lose their parents to disease or violence or accidents. They end up in overcrowded orphanages or working as servants with no real family to love them." James felt understanding begin to dawn. He reined his horse to a stop and turned to look at his wife, seeing the hope and fear mingled in her expression. "You want to take an orphan? Would that be enough?" Catherine asked, her voice small. I know it is not the same as children of your blood, but there are so many who need homes, who need love. We have room in the ranch house. We have the means to provide for more than just ourselves. Would it be enough for you if we built our family that way?" James dismounted and helped Catherine down from her horse, pulling her into his arms there in the middle of the dark road with only the stars as witnesses. "Catherine, you could give me nothing but your presence every day for the rest of my life, and it would be enough. But if you want to open our home to children who need us, then I say yes. I say yes with my whole heart." She hugged him tightly, relief and excitement flooding through her. "Truly?" "Truly," he confirmed. "Let us build something good here. Something that honors the losses we have both endured by turning them into hope for others." They made inquiries in Tombstone and discovered that there was indeed an orphanage run by the Catholic Church, overcrowded and struggling with limited resources. The priest, Father Miguel, was initially skeptical of the young couple who came asking about adoption. But when James and Catherine explained their situation and their genuine desire to provide a home for children who had none, his demeanor softened. "We have so many," he said sadly, leading them through the building where too many small faces peered out from cramped rooms. "The frontier is hard on families. Disease, accidents, violence. These children have lost everything." Catherine felt her heart breaking and mending simultaneously as she looked at the orphans. There were children of all ages, some Mexican, some white, some with mixed heritage that made them outcasts in a society obsessed with bloodlines and racial purity. She saw the hunger in their eyes, not just for food, but for love, for belonging, for someone to claim them as worthy of care. "We want to start with 2, James said practically. "We want to ensure we can provide properly before we take on more." Father Miguel nodded approvingly. "A wise approach. Let me introduce you to some of the children who have been here longest." They met several over the course of that afternoon, but 2 in particular captured Catherine's heart. The first was a girl named Maria, age 7, whose parents had died in a fire. She was shy and serious, with dark eyes that held too much knowledge of sorrow. The second was a boy named Samuel, age 9, whose family had been killed in an Apache raid. He was angry and defensive, with a sharp tongue that he used to keep people at a distance. "Those 2 are difficult," Father Miguel warned. "Maria barely speaks, and Samuel fights with the other children constantly. They have been here over a year with no interest from potential families." "Then they are the ones who need us most," Catherine said firmly, and James nodded his agreement. The process took several weeks of visits and paperwork, but by early April, Maria and Samuel came to live at the Dalton Ranch. The transition was not easy. Samuel tested every boundary, defying instructions and starting arguments at every opportunity. Maria cried herself to sleep each night for the first 2 weeks, silent tears that soaked her pillow. Catherine sat with her those nights, not saying much, just being present while James worked patiently with Samuel, teaching him to care for the horses and never rising to the boy's provocations. Slowly, gradually, the children began to understand that this was not temporary, that James and Catherine were not going to send them back. The breakthrough with Samuel came when one of the mares gave birth to a foal with a twisted leg. Samuel watched as James carefully splinted the tiny leg and worked with the foal every day to strengthen it. After a week, the boy began joining James in the barn, helping with the exercises, his anger melting into focus and care. "Why do you bother?" Samuel asked one day. "It would be easier to just put down a foal that is broken." James looked at the boy steadily. "Nothing that is broken is beyond help if someone is willing to put in the work. That is true for foals, and it is true for people." Samuel stared at him, and something shifted behind his eyes. "You are talking about me." "I am talking about all of us," James said gently. "We have all been broken by life, Samuel. Every person in this family has scars, but we can heal if we let ourselves, if we accept that we are worthy of being helped." That night at dinner, Samuel thanked Catherine for the meal without being prompted. And though it was a small thing, tears sprang to her eyes at the breakthrough it represented. Maria's transformation was quieter, but no less profound. She began following Catherine everywhere, learning to cook and garden, slowly beginning to talk about her memories of her parents, the good times before the fire. Catherine listened to everything, validating Maria's feelings, never telling her to stop being sad or to move on. The girl needed to grieve, and Catherine understood that better than most. By summer, the children were calling them Mama Catherine and Papa James, names that felt more precious than gold. The ranch house echoed with laughter now, with the sounds of children running and playing, with bedtime stories and morning lessons in reading and arithmetic that Catherine provided. James taught both children to ride, patient with their mistakes, celebrating their successes. They were becoming a family in the truest sense of the word, bound not by blood but by choice and love. In August, James and Catherine decided they had room in their hearts and home for more. They returned to the orphanage and this time brought home 3 additional children. Twin girls aged 5 named Lucy and Lily, whose mother had died in childbirth and whose father had drunk himself to death a year later, and a baby boy of 18 months named Thomas, named by Catherine in honor of her first husband, who had been left at the church with no note or explanation. The ranch became a place of joyful chaos. Catherine thrived in her role as mother, discovering reserves of patience and creativity she had not known she possessed. She taught the girls to sew and to read. She rocked baby Thomas when he cried. She mediated disputes and wiped tears and celebrated every small victory. James built additions onto the house to accommodate their growing family, and the children helped according to their abilities, even little Maria taking pride in handing him nails and tools. Diego and Rafael proved invaluable, helping not just with ranch work, but with the children, teaching them Spanish songs and showing them how to weave ropes and repair tack. The ranch became a place where different cultures and backgrounds blended together, where what mattered was not where you came from, but the content of your character. As fall arrived and the children prepared for the school term, Catherine and James would sit on the porch after everyone was asleep, exhausted but deeply content. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked one night. "Taking on all of this, all of us?" James pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Not for a single moment. You gave me your heart, Catherine, and in return, I have received more blessings than I could have imagined. These children, this family we have built, it is everything I did not know I needed." "I love you," she said simply, the words containing multitudes of meaning. "I love you too," he replied, "more than words can express." The years that followed were not without challenges. The ranch faced droughts and hard winters. The children went through illnesses and growing pains, and the violence of the frontier sometimes came too close for comfort. But through it all, James and Catherine faced each obstacle together, their love deepening with every shared trial and triumph. Samuel grew into a fine young man, working the ranch alongside James and eventually taking over much of the horse training operation. He married at 22, bringing his bride to live in a house James helped him build on the property. And when Samuel's first child was born, he and his wife named the baby James in honor of the man who had saved him. Maria blossomed into a beautiful young woman with a gift for teaching. She became the school teacher in Tombstone, beloved by her students, and married the new doctor who came to town, a kind man who valued her gentle spirit. She never forgot that Catherine had sat with her through those dark nights when she first arrived at the ranch, and she visited often, bringing her own children to play with their cousins. The twins, Lucy and Lily, were inseparable their whole lives. They married brothers and moved to California, but they wrote long letters home every month, and the families visited back and forth regularly. Little Thomas, who had been a baby when he arrived, grew up never knowing he was not born into the Dalton family. He inherited Catherine's head for business and James's way with animals, and he eventually expanded the ranch into one of the most successful operations in the territory. As James and Catherine aged, their hair going silver and their faces gaining lines that spoke of years well lived, they watched their family grow and multiply. Their house was always full during holidays, with children and grandchildren spilling into every room, with laughter and arguments and the beautiful messiness of a large, loving family. On a warm evening in the spring of 1910, James and Catherine sat on their porch. The same spot where they had shared so many conversations over the years. They were in their 50s now, still healthy and active, but aware that life was precious and finite. The sunset painted the Arizona sky in shades of orange and purple, and in the distance they could hear their grandchildren playing in the yard while their adult children prepared dinner in the house. "Do you remember that day in the barn?" Catherine asked, leaning against James's shoulder. "When I told you I was barren?" "I remember every detail," James said, taking her hand in his. "I remember thinking that you were offering me an excuse to leave, but all I wanted was to pull you close and never let go." "You said to give you my heart instead," Catherine said softly. "It was the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me, and I did give you my heart, James, every piece of it." "And you have had mine from that moment on," James replied. "Probably from before then, if I'm honest. From the first time you smiled at me over a cup of coffee on your porch." Catherine turned to look at the house, at the lights spilling from the windows, at the shapes of the people they loved moving inside. "We built something good, did we not? Despite everything we lost, despite what I could not give you. You gave me everything that mattered," James said firmly. "You gave me love and partnership and purpose. You gave me a family that is bound by choice and devotion rather than obligation. Our children may not have our blood, but they have our hearts. And that makes them ours in every way that counts." "I used to think my barrenness was a curse," Catherine admitted. "I carried so much shame about it for years, but now I understand it was not a curse at all. If I had been able to bear children, I would never have thought to adopt. All those babies who needed us, who would have grown up without love and family, they came to us because of what I could not do naturally. My limitation became the very thing that allowed us to save them." James was quiet for a moment, absorbing the wisdom in his wife's words. "I'd never thought of it that way, but you are right. What seemed like an ending was actually a beginning. Your courage in telling me the truth, my realization that love is more than bloodlines. It opened a door we might never have walked through otherwise." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear. Inside, someone called that dinner was ready, and they could hear the thunder of footsteps as the grandchildren raced to the table. Catherine and James stood slowly, joints creaking slightly with age but spirits undimmed, and walked hand in hand into the house filled with the family they had built from broken pieces and unconditional love. Samuel was serving the roast while his wife corralled their 3 children into seats. Maria was helping Thomas's wife set the table while Thomas bounced his infant daughter on his knee. The twins had sent a telegram saying they would arrive tomorrow with their families. The long table that James had built years ago to accommodate their growing household was crowded and chaotic and perfect. As everyone settled and James prepared to say grace, he looked around at the faces gathered there. Some bore resemblances to each other, siblings who shared blood, but most were a beautiful mixture of different heritages and backgrounds. What they all shared was the knowledge that they were loved, that they belonged, that the Dalton Ranch was a place where family was defined by loyalty and care rather than genetics. "Before we pray," James said, his voice carrying across the happy noise, "I want to say something. Your mother and I have been reminded today of how blessed we are. We faced losses early in our lives that could have destroyed us, but instead we found each other. And then we found all of you. Every person at this table is a gift, a treasure we thank God for every day. So let us give thanks not just for this food, but for each other, for this family that was built on love." There was a chorus of agreement, and Catherine felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. After the prayer, as the food was passed and conversations erupted in multiple directions, Catherine caught James's eye across the table and smiled. He smiled back, and in that exchange was contained 28 years of marriage, of partnership, of loving each other through every season of life. Later that night, after the dishes were washed and the children and grandchildren had departed to their own homes or settled into guest rooms, James and Catherine prepared for bed in the room they had shared for nearly 3 decades. Catherine brushed out her silver hair while James removed his boots. the simple domesticity of the routine comforting in its familiarity. "James," Catherine said as she climbed into bed beside him, "thank you for loving me. Thank you for seeing past what I could not give you to what I could." He pulled her close, her head finding its customary place on his shoulder. "Catherine, you are still not understanding. You gave me everything. You gave me your heart, and in doing so, you gave me the world." She tilted her face up to kiss him, and the kiss held all the tenderness and passion of a love that had only grown deeper with time. When they finally settled down to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, both were smiling. The next morning, Catherine woke before dawn, as was her habit. She slipped out of bed carefully so as not to wake James and went to the kitchen to start coffee. Through the window, she could see the ranch spreading out before her, the land they had worked and loved, the barns and corrals that housed horses and cattle, the small house where Samuel lived with his family. In the distance, the sun was just beginning to paint the sky with color. She heard footsteps and turned to find Maria had arrived early. Her daughter came into the kitchen and hugged her tightly. "Good morning, Mama. I wanted to come help with breakfast before everyone wakes up." "That is thoughtful of you, sweetheart," Catherine said, holding her close. Maria was 35 now, a mother herself, but she still called Catherine Mama and sought her advice and company. The bond they had formed when Maria was a traumatized 7-year-old had only strengthened over the years. As they worked together preparing food for the crowd that would soon descend, Maria said quietly, "I was talking with Samuel yesterday. He told me how Papa responded when you told him about not being able to have children. I never knew that story." Catherine paused in her work. "It is not something I speak of often. Those memories are painful, even now." "But Papa made it beautiful," Maria said. "He told you to give him your heart instead. That is like something from a novel." "Your father has always had a poet's soul hidden beneath his cowboy exterior," Catherine said with a soft smile. "He saw me when I was convinced I was worthless, and he loved me anyway. He loved me because of who I was, not because of what I could provide." "You know that his response changed all of our lives, do you not?" Maria said thoughtfully. "If he had rejected you, if he had insisted on having biological children, you two would never have adopted us. We would have grown up in that orphanage or worse. His love for you, his willingness to build a family differently, that saved us." Catherine felt her eyes fill with tears. "I have never quite thought of it in those terms, but you are correct. Love creates ripples that extend far beyond the two people involved. James and I loved each other, and that love expanded to encompass all of you, and now you are creating your own families, your own ripples of love." They embraced again, and then the moment was broken by the sound of children waking up and the chaos of a large family breakfast beginning. James emerged from the bedroom, hair tousled, and came to kiss Catherine's cheek before pouring himself coffee. Thomas arrived with his wife and baby. Samuel brought his family over from their house. The twins and their husbands and children rolled in just as the eggs were being served, having caught an earlier train than expected. The long table was filled once more, this time with breakfast instead of dinner, and the noise level was tremendous, with everyone talking and laughing at once. James looked down the length of the table to where Catherine sat at the far end, surrounded by children and grandchildren, her face glowing with happiness, and he felt a swell of gratitude so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. She had given him her heart, as he had asked, but in truth they had given their hearts to each other and then to all these precious souls who called them Mama and Papa. The barrenness that had once seemed like a curse had transformed into the greatest blessing, because it had opened them to a different way of creating family, a way that had saved children who desperately needed saving and had filled their own lives with purpose and joy beyond measure. After breakfast, James suggested a family photograph. They had a camera that Thomas had purchased, a modern marvel that captured images on film, and everyone gathered on the front porch of the ranch house, arranging themselves in rows. Catherine and James sat in the center with the baby on Catherine's lap, surrounded by their children and their children's children. 3 generations of a family built on love. As Thomas set up the camera and prepared to take the picture, James reached over and took Catherine's hand. She squeezed back, and they shared a look that needed no words. In her eyes, he saw reflected back all the years they had shared, all the challenges they had overcome, all the love they had given and received. In his eyes, she saw the same, plus something else, a promise that he would continue choosing her, continue loving her, every day for the rest of their lives. "Everyone say family," Thomas called out, and the word echoed from multiple voices, some young and piping, some deeper and mature, but all filled with genuine affection and belonging. The shutter clicked, capturing that moment forever, preserving on film what Catherine and James had built from ashes and sorrow. When the photograph was later developed and framed, it would hang in the ranch house for generations, a testament to the power of love to transform loss into legacy, to turn two broken people into the foundation of something beautiful and enduring. As the day continued with writing and games and more meals, with stories being told and memories being made, Catherine found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had been married twice, first to a good man who had loved her but could not protect her from the violence of the frontier, and then to James, who had loved her not despite her perceived flaws, but as a whole person worthy of devotion. She thought about that day in the barn, about how terrified she had been to confess her barrenness, certain it would drive James away. She remembered the exact tone of his voice when he had said, "Then give me your heart instead." The way his words had pierced through years of shame and self-doubt to reach something true and valuable at her core. That moment had been the turning point, the instant when she began to understand that her worth was not tied to her fertility, that she could still live a life of meaning and purpose and love. The shadows were growing long when James found Catherine sitting alone on the porch swing, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. He settled beside her, the swing creaking slightly under their combined weight, and put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, breathing in the scent that was uniquely his, a mixture of leather and sage and home. "What are you thinking about, Ishas?" he asked, his voice a low rumble she felt as much as heard. "Everything," she said simply. "Our whole life together. How we got here from where we started." "It has been quite a journey," James agreed. "If someone had told me back in 1882 that the broken widower I was would end up here surrounded by this much love and life, I would not have believed them." "I was so certain I had nothing to offer you," Catherine confessed. "I believed the lie that society tells women, that our only value is in bearing children. I had internalized that message so completely that I thought you would be better off without me." "Society is frequently wrong," James said firmly, "and I am grateful every day that I followed my heart instead of convention. You have given me everything that matters, Catherine. A partnership of equals, a love that has weathered every storm, a family that is richer and more diverse than anything I could have created alone. You took my lonely existence and filled it with meaning." "We did that for each other," Catherine corrected gently. "I was equally lost before you came into my life. We saved each other, and then together we saved our children." They sat in comfortable silence, swinging gently, watching as their grandchildren played in the yard, their shouts and laughter carrying on the evening air. Maria's daughter was teaching Thomas's son to do a cartwheel. Samuel's boys were climbing trees with the fearlessness of youth. The baby was toddling around under the watchful eye of multiple adults. It was a scene of domestic happiness that would have been impossible to imagine during those dark days after Thomas's death, during those years when Catherine believed herself to be broken beyond repair. "Do you have any regrets?" James asked, the question one they had asked each other periodically over the years, a way of checking in, of ensuring they were still walking the right path together. "None," Catherine said without hesitation. "There were moments of pain, certainly, times when I grieved what I could not have naturally. But those moments were far outweighed by the joy of what we built instead. If I could go back and change things, make myself able to bear children, I would not do it. Because that would mean not having Maria and Samuel and Thomas and the twins. It would mean a different family, not this one, and I love this one too much to wish it away. I feel the same, James said. I grieved my first son for years, but I have come to understand that I can hold that grief while also celebrating the children we raised. Both things can be true at once. Love is not a finite resource that gets used up. It expands to hold everything we need it to hold. They watched the sun sink lower, painting the sky in brilliant shades of crimson and gold. The temperature was dropping as it always did in the desert once the sun set, and Catherine shivered slightly. James pulled her closer, sharing his warmth, and she thought about how this simple gesture encapsulated their entire marriage. They protected each other, comforted each other, were each other's safe harbor in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. I would do it all again, Catherine said softly. Every moment, every choice, every challenge, because all of it led me here, to you, to this life we share. As would I, James replied, kissing the top of her head. You gave me your heart, Catherine Dalton, and I have treasured it every day since. They remained on the porch until the stars emerged, bright and countless in the clear desert sky, the same stars that had witnessed their first tentative conversations, their wedding vows, and every significant moment of their life together. Inside the house, lights blazed and voices called, and eventually Catherine and James rose to rejoin their family, to participate in the bedtime routines and final conversations of the day. That night, as they lay in bed with the house finally quiet around them, Catherine whispered into the darkness, "Thank you for not caring about sons. Thank you for caring about me." "Always," James whispered back, and they fell asleep intertwined, hearts beating in synchronized rhythm. Two people who had found in each other not just love, but redemption, not just partnership, but purpose. The years continued to pass, as years do, bringing with them the joys and sorrows that are part of every life. James and Catherine grew older gracefully, remaining active and involved with the ranch and their family well into their 60s. They celebrated the births of great-grandchildren, attended weddings and anniversaries, mourned when death claimed friends and neighbors. Through it all, their love remained the constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. When James passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, Catherine grieved deeply, but without the shattering despair that had characterized Thomas's violent death. She had been given decades with James, years filled with love and laughter and partnership, and while she missed him terribly, she did not regret a single moment. Their children and grandchildren rallied around her, surrounding her with care and support, demonstrating the lessons they had learned from watching James and Catherine love each other. Catherine lived another 8 years after James's death, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. She spent her final years writing down the family history, ensuring that future generations would know the story of how their family had been built, how love had triumphed over loss, how two broken people had created something whole and beautiful. She wrote about the day in the barn when she had confessed her barrenness, about James's response that had changed everything, about the children they had saved and who had, in turn, saved them. When Catherine passed away at 80, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and James had created, her last words were a whisper. "I gave him my heart, and he gave me the world." She died with a smile on her face, at peace with the life she had lived and confident in the legacy she was leaving behind. The family buried Catherine next to James in the cemetery outside Tombstone, under the vast Arizona sky they had both loved. The headstone was simple but perfect. Catherine Dalton, beloved wife and mother, 1859 to 1939. Next to it, James's headstone read, James Dalton, devoted husband and father, 1854 to 1926. Below both inscriptions, added at Catherine's request, was a single line that told their story. They built their family with love. In the years that followed, the Dalton Ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations. The house was preserved as it had been when Catherine and James lived there, becoming a gathering place for reunions and celebrations. The story of how the family began, of Catherine's barrenness and James's beautiful response, was told and retold, becoming a cherished part of family lore that taught each new generation about the true meaning of love and family. The photograph taken that morning in 1910 of James and Catherine surrounded by their children and grandchildren hung in a place of honor, a testament to what they had built together. Visitors to the ranch, whether family members or strangers interested in frontier history, would stop before that picture and marvel at the diverse faces looking back at them, at the evident love and belonging visible even in a still image. And so the legacy of James and Catherine Dalton lived on. Not in bloodlines, but in values, not in DNA, but in the lessons they had taught about what truly matters. They had taken society's definition of family and expanded it, had transformed personal tragedy into communal triumph, had proven that love chosen is as powerful as love born. Their story became a reminder that sometimes our greatest limitations become our greatest strengths, that what we think of as endings can actually be beginnings, and that the most important thing anyone can give or receive is not children or wealth or status, but simply a heart freely offered and gratefully received. The desert wind still blows across the Arizona territory, now a state, carrying with it the dust of history and the echoes of stories both told and untold. But the story of the cowboy who told his barren wife to give him her heart instead, and of the family they built from that single act of unconditional love, that story endures, passed down through generations, a beacon of hope for anyone who has ever felt broken or insufficient or less than. It reminds us all that we are more than our limitations, that love is larger than biology, and that family is ultimately defined not by blood but by the hearts we choose to hold.